Hello, everyone. I am so excited that you came in today. Today we have Dr. Henard here, Executive Director of the Rape Crisis Center. She's here to talk to us about date rape. Um, Let me let her introduce herself to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Indira Henard, and I am the Executive Director of the DC Rape Crisis Center, which is the oldest rape crisis center in the country and the only one in Washington, DC. We are in our 50th year, which is really exciting. I've been doing sexual violence work for almost 20 years, and I've been at the DC Rape Crisis Center for 14 years.
Oh, wow, great. That's amazing. So there's one in DC. Are there locations as well in Virginia and Baltimore as well?
So totally, there's about 130 something rape crisis centers across the country.
Okay. Okay. And this is through the government or the state that this is through, or like a nonprofit?
So there are independent rape crisis centers across the country, but some of the rape crisis centers may be a part of the state sexual assault coalition. So the rape crisis centers would be their member programs.
Okay, great. The reason why I wanted to speak with Dr. Henard is because in my book, I Choose Me, I describe an encounter in which I was raped by my ex-husband, along with being raped in a relationship that I was in. I thought it was important to talk to women because I've had experiences with speaking to women. I think when I was around 20 years old, I was talking to a group, maybe 5 women, and we end up talking about date rape. And almost every single person in that room had been raped before. And they were unclear as to whether that was considered rape or not, but it happened. It was they had sex not wanting or unwillingly, basically. And at that time, I had never experienced that, but it shocked me to know that every single Black woman that I was talking to in that room that occurred. So let's first start off with talking about what is rape, defining what is rape and date rape.
Yeah, so rape in general, the FBI, probably almost close to a decade ago, they really expanded the paradigm for what rape is, or sexual violence, or sexual assault. So it really sits on a gender-based violence continuum, right? And so what we like to say is rape, sexual assault is any unwanted sexual contact. Right. So it doesn't matter if you know the person, it doesn't matter if you're married to the person, it doesn't matter if you consented to A, B, C, and D, but didn't want to do E, F, and G, right? It's any unwanted sexual contact. And so yes means yes, and anything else means no. And when you're talking about date rape, and specifically 9 times out of 10, you have some type of familiarity, with the assailant, right? So perhaps you know him in general, or her, or there was some type of relationship, but it's more of a kind of intimate relationship.
Mhm. I saw that there was a high percentage with statistics with the number of women who would be raped or possibly have date rape occur to them, very largely for the African American population. Is that true? Do you notice more of the people who seek assistance are African American?
Yeah, so I think what the data tells us in general is that 1 in 4 women are sexually violated, 1 in 10 men are sexually violated, 1 in 6 men are sexually violated, and 1 in 10 children are sexually violated. But when we're talking about African Americans, sexual violence disproportionately impacts communities of color and folks who sit on the margin. But specifically for Black women, over 60% of Black women have been sexually violated at some point in their life. Right? So we do, for example, at the DC Rape Crisis Center, the majority of our clients are BIPOC clients, but primarily coming from the African American community.
Okay. I was reading of something also with, it's called coercive sexual contact. What does that mean? Could you just explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that can mean that someone is trying to coerce you into having sex verbally, or perhaps it's via a threat, perhaps It's a way that's really trying to really pull you into a sexual situation that you don't want to. And so it can be a variety of ways that folks try to coerce you into doing that, but primarily we see it through verbal. Sometimes we see it through threatening, where sometimes they may also use a weapon as well.
Oh, wow. Surprisingly, when I was advertising for our meeting, I had came across a man who was actually saying things such as he was implying that African American women in particular, that they set themselves up for this to occur, date rape,
Mhm.
etc. And I was really just alarmed by that statement. I did also put a poll out to ask people, um, do you think that someone can be raped and be in a relationship? And most of people said yes, but I did see some people say no. And
Mhm.
they said, and they were female as well. So that also shocked me. Do you find that some of the clients that come in, that they are unsure of whether that what happened to them is considered rape if it's been in a relationship?
So I think kind of a couple of things. I think we have to begin to break down the myths and the stereotypes around sexual violence, right?
Mhm.
So really talking to people about what is sexual violence, what constitutes sexual violence, right? So we've seen over the years where folks will come to us and not sure if what has happened is considered sexual violence, or they may not consider it a quote unquote real rape, right? But what we have to do in those moments is give psychoeducation, right? I
Right.
think the other piece, particularly when you're talking about the African American community, there is historically a taboo around sexual assault, right? A taboo in terms of talking about it and breaking the silence and piercing the veil in our community, right? Because historically in African American communities, we're taught not to talk about it, right? If something happens to you, you keep it in house, right? Because we don't air our dirty laundry in public, right? We can go to Jesus about it and we can pray about it, but right, we don't take it outside of the house, right? And so that has contributed to a lot of the stigma, right? And so we really need to begin to have the conversation and start to name what's happening to us and really start to tell our stories to really begin to have this inclusive conversation.
Mhm. When I had the experience that I talked in my book about two different experiences. The one that I had with my ex-husband, I didn't really realize that that was rape until I was getting a restraining order, or getting a restraining order for physical violence. And I had a woman who was sitting on the at court, and she was testifying, and she was talking about how her husband had sodomized her. And I thought to myself, the way that she said it, and she fought and she was crying and she described incidents. And I heard her say this, and thought to myself, this happened to me. And I didn't even know that that was considered rape. I assume that you're supposed to submit. You hear people podcasts and different things are trying to teach women how they're supposed to become quote unquote good wives,
Mhm.
etc., and how they need to submit to their husband. Even in the church, you hear sometimes when you say you have to follow your husband and submit to him as part of the church. When I had later in my life, when I found myself in another relationship with a spouse later, I had a situation where it felt like it was very much control. That
Mhm.
person, I was asking that person to leave, that I wanted to end the relationship, and they wanted to show me that they were in power. And I felt like after that situation occurred, it felt like I had these two people in my head arguing and going back with each other, combating with each other about what happened. Does this really happen? Are you going to let him get away with it? Um, and I found that once I went and I decided immediately after I called the police and
Mhm.
that person was arrested, I found that my close family members, when I
Mhm.
went to them to tell them what happened, the first response to them, I was called a man eater. And another
Mm,
response I was told, why are you doing this to him? Why are you doing, he has kids, you're going to ruin his life. Why are you doing that to him? And it kept me from, I wanted him to leave and be away from me, but it kept me from pressing charges. How
mhm.
common is this, that you have seen when you talk to your clients? How
You
common
mean
are
it,
these
you mean
experiences?
in terms of the marriage, in terms of the marriage
Yeah, the
piece?
marriage piece too, because I think a lot of people have been raped and they don't realize it. And it's been normalized because it's part of marriage.
Yeah, and so I think kind of what we know to be true, and one of the myths that we have to continue to break down is that even if you are in a married relationship, consent still needs to happen,
Right.
right? And if consent doesn't happen, then that is rape, right? That is sexual violence. But what we also have to keep in mind is that this looks different in different cultures,
Okay.
right? And so I think that's also important to know. But, historically, we know to be true that, there have been wives who have been in marriage and they have been forced to have sex with their husbands. We know the impact that religious doctrine
Mhm.
can have on interpersonal relationships, particularly when it comes to sex and sexuality and all of those things, right? But from a sexual advocate perspective, from the sexual movement perspective, is that you still need consent within the confines of a marriage. But what we also hold is that different cultures have different beliefs. And so we still want to support, right, survivors who come from different backgrounds
Mhm.
and may not believe what their culture has taught them or told them, right?
Yeah.
So, it's really important to note that when you're talking about sexual violence in general, you must do it from an intersectional lens, right? You must do it from an anti-oppression lens because, as Audre Lorde said, sexual violence is not a single issue because we don't live single issue lives, right? And
Right.
so you can't talk about sexual violence without talking about reproductive justice, without talking about LGBTQI I rights, right, et cetera, right? So really looking at this from all of the things that can intersect
Mhm.
with sexual violence. And that really is the only way we feel as a movement to do it, because when you silo it, then you miss out on all these other factors.
Mhm. I see. Um, that's definitely true. I was looking at too, in my family, I see a generational trend of rape.
Mhm,
And I
mhm,
saw that my mother and my grandmother, and as far as you go back, of course, with the African American
mhm,
community, it's obvious that we have had rape occur because of
mhm,
the array of colors that we
mhm,
come in. And you were
mhm.
talking about how the culture is different. I've
Yep.
been, have talked with different people, worked with different people from different cultures, from the Asian American culture too, and so forth, who have been raped, and it looked different for them, as well as Caucasians. Um, what do you think is can rape be a generational curse? Do you think, can you be predisposed to be raped because your grandmother or your mother? Do you think that's even possible? Like,
So, oh, sorry.
no, no, I'm asking.
So I would not say it's a generational curse. What I would say is that, for example, let's take the African American community, right?
Mhm.
Part of the struggle is that if it happened to my mother and it happened to my grandmother, and the way they dealt with it was silence and keeping it in the family, when it happens to me, that generational curse, quote unquote, has not been broken,
Mm,
right? So it's not a generational, quote unquote, curse in terms of if they got sexually assaulted, you're going to get sexually assaulted. Absolutely not. What is the curse is the way in which it is responded to,
Mm.
right? And so that's why we have to really start to name it and break the silence. And that's how you get away from those generational trends, right? And I think a big piece of that is because we do see kind of the the intergenerational response to sexual violence, and it's very different, right? It's very different. So the curse comes in how it is talked about, how it is responded to, and ultimately how it is dealt with in terms of getting help and all of those things.
I think it's I just remember as a child, and I'm not, aware because I'm an African American woman, how it would be for a Caucasian woman, because I've been putting up information about sexual assault and sharing, and one woman who's Caucasian, she said this is happening to all of us. It's not just an African American woman thing, it's a woman thing. And I know for growing up, my grandmother, for example, they would tell us little things, and I see myself doing the same thing, kind of in a way. She would say, "Well, you have to sit like this, or don't do that, or wear this, or cover your body up, or do this." It's almost like you're telling the girl that you're the reason if you're getting molested or something happens to you, that you're the cause of it because you need to do X, Y, and Z so that somebody doesn't want to come over and sexually abuse you. Do you find have you heard that, or do you feel that that is true as well?
So, it's important to note that there's nothing that you can do to quote unquote prevent sexual assault,
Mhm.
right? Sexual assault is about power, it's about control, right? Part of breaking down those myths about saying, oh, don't wear this and sit like this and et cetera, has to do with really giving psychoeducation around what sexual violence is, how it happens, what are some kind of preventative things that you can keep in mind while also understanding that you really can't prevent it, but there are ways in which we can disrupt what we call rape culture, right? So again, a lot of this is, kind of what you just outlined. It's myths, right? It's
Mhm.
not facts, right? And it's myths that doesn't have really the full picture and education around what exactly sexual violence is. And because people don't talk about it, there's not education on it in a more intentional way. That's how you start to hear those responses,
How
right?
should we talk as a parent? When should we start talking to our children about this? Is there a certain age, or to just start talking to them about what, because of, the world is really going fast for our kids. They're being
Mhm,
exposed to a lot of different things. I remember having a friend who said her daughter was at camp, and the person who was at camp had been raped, and they
mhm,
were school age, maybe early middle school. And then
mhm.
she had to explain to her child what it is. Do you think that we as parents should be discussing these things with our children early? And should we be preparing them? How should we be doing that? And at what age do you think we should do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of school programming around consent one-on-one and safe touch and unsafe
Mhm,
touch. So yes, parents, educators should be talking to kids, particularly parents, when they're knee high, right?
mhm,
Talking to them when they're in junior high, high school, it's a little bit too late, right? And
mhm,
so the conversation as parents are rearing their kids starts when they are almost toddlers, right? So when you are talking to them and teaching them about their body, using the proper anatomical names for body parts, right? Talking about what is safe touch, what is unsafe touch, right? That kind of parlays as they get older into what is healthy relationships and all of that, right? So yes, the conversation should start young because that's how you begin to have education. That's how you begin to really break down some of these myths and facts that I've been talking about.
definitely. With the influx of online dating, I was wondering, how has that affect? Have you noticed that any clients or anyone that receives services has this has resulted from online dating, since that's very popular? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's important that when anybody is engaging in online dating, that you want to try to adhere to as many safety measures as possible, right? So we can't technically link online dating to a high rate of sexual assault, but we can again try to put in safety measures around, disrupting that rape culture that can particularly happen in online and tech spaces.
Mhm.
So that is really what we try to teach in terms of how to be safe and how to be mindful when you are engaging on social media, when you're in chat rooms, when you're doing online dating, right? There's, a whole kind of tech and safety that, advocates have been really pushing out, particularly since we've been in this virtual environment.
Okay. What resources do you offer when someone comes in and they speak to someone, they reach out to speak to someone about being raped? What resources are they going to receive at the crisis center?
Yeah, so there are the general resources we offer, which is kind of our, all of our services are free, individual and group counseling. We have our 24/7 crisis hotline. If
Mm.
folks need to get a SANE exam or rather a rape kit, we can offer that and support them in that. If folks need a long-term advocate, for general advocacy services, we can support them in that. So whatever need they have that is impacting their sexual trauma, we can support them. So if they're having trouble with their rent, if they need to get legal services, whatever that looks like, emergency housing, we're really kind of a one-stop shop for survivors, and our services are really holistic because, again, sexual violence sits at the intersection, right? So what we know to be true is that survivors aren't just walking into our office to, deal with their sexual trauma, right? There may be those other cross-cutting issues such as housing and food insecurity and, other economic issues that may be impacting them. And so if they tell us that they need these additional resources, then we can customize what I call kind of a resource plan to connect them with whatever resource they may need.
Oh, wonderful. I noticed too, I was sharing with my students, I talk to them a lot about the disproportionate incidence of criminalization. I talk to them about things in our community affecting us. I teach science, but I teach them a lot of different things. And I was just showing them as well how there are a lot of missing children. I noticed too in the DC area as well, in this area that go missing. What
Mhm.
are the age groups that you usually see that are coming to seek help for your organization? Do you get young girls or?
Yeah, absolutely. So we serve as young as 11 at our agency. We used to serve as young as 3, but now we serve as young as 11.
Wow, that's scary. You
Mhm,
know,
mhm.
I appreciate you coming and talking to us about what's going on. I think it's important for us as women to realize that some of these behaviors we can't allow them to be normalized. You
Mhm.
can't allow people to think it's okay for rape to occur in relationships, because what happens is we don't report it and we stay in those relationships. We stay in these abusive relationships that affect our families, affect our children, etc. And then we seek out those type of relationships with other people once it ends. It causes a lot of stigmas in our community as well associated with that. Is there anything that you would like to say to the audience that you think that would be good information to tell us about rape or statistics, or how we should inform ourselves about it?
I think kind of my parting words will is, sexual assault can happen to anyone, right?
Mhm.
It does not discriminate in terms of age, race, gender, any of that. And whether or not this happened to you 50 years ago or 50 months ago or 50 hours ago, 50 weeks ago, right? You can still get help, right? Because what we do at the DC Rape Crisis Center. And the way we show up is that we hold space and we bear witness to the unimaginable, right? We create a buffet of healing options. We create multiple choice gates that helps to facilitate your healing, right? So we are all about soul work. So I want folks to know that if you have been sexually violated and you want to get support, there is no timetable to when you can receive those services, right? And I want people to know that they aren't alone and that healing is possible, right? And that there is hope, right? And so knowing that this is a issue that, you know, folks are really working hard to try to create a world free from sexual violence,
Mhm.
right? But we know in these really challenging times right now, particularly under the COVID pandemic, that home is not safe for a lot of folks,
Yeah.
right? And so, you know, our services have not stopped. We have continued to see over a 50% increase in requests for services, right? So that also lets me know that, you know, as quiet as it's kept, sexual assault is still happening,
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
And so, you know, help is out there. And so my hope is that, you know, if folks are feeling isolated, if folks are feeling alone, reach out for help. Our hotline number is 202-333-RAPE. We have folks who are available 24/7 on our crisis hotline.
Mhm.
And, you know, you can call us and we can connect you with our intake person and we can go with you on your journey.
I appreciate. I think that's a big thing because people don't realize the PTSD that can develop from something like that. I had suffered from PTSD. I watched a movie the other night about the effects of the anxiety and
Mhm.
so forth it had on a woman who was sexually assaulted. And I had even watched. I noticed months later. After the incident I had in a relationship, I watched a movie where a woman was date raped and she did not have a lot of support and people believing her. And I was shocked at how my body responded to it and
Mhm.
how I just was overly emotional about
Mhm.
it because I felt like I went through the same occurrence.
Mhm.
Um, I want to thank you, Dr. Henard, for your time and
Thank
setting out
you.
time to come and clarify some things for us. I believe it will definitely and really help a lot of us women out here so that we can stop this type of behavior and stop normalizing and allow women to speak up and for our communities to understand that it's something that we shouldn't go hush about, that we
Mhm.
should
Mhm.
expose, that we should treat, and that we should seek treatment for. So I
Mhm.
greatly appreciate you coming out and speaking to us about it.
Absolutely.
And I,
Thank you so much for having us.
yes, and I will share the information, the number as well
Okay,
in the video to show them where they
awesome.
can
And I'll
get.
also just say April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's a lot happening in April as well. So
I would love to
yeah,
be a part of that in
yeah,
April as well in the DC area for sexual assault. Okay, sounds
absolutely.
good. Okay,
All right.